that's the case if legacy systems and especially the applications in the databases that are involved with legacy systems are transferred. I say that, of two minds, because for as long as I've worked with examiners, they've insisted upon looking at data centers, going inside and physically examining mainframes and other pieces, and you would think that they would know what they were looking at. And in that sense, cloud is really no different at all. It is actually having a grasp of the standards and the policies and the controls around it that's important, not the ability to physically inspect it. The next thing would be security policy enforcement. Suppose you deploy not one, but several cloud vendors. How are you able to oversee them and ensure that, in fact, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? There are arguments that say that cloud turns the last mile into a single point of failure, but in fact, that's true of all of our data centers. They're all single points of failure. The internet is the choke there. There have been GAO studies about whether we even have the bandwidth with internet to bring it remotely to workers who might need it in a large-scale catastrophe. Compliance and security, as I said, is difficult to assess and monitor. And there's one other piece which probably troubles me the most, and that's based on being about halfway through Richard Clarke's new book. And that is really that something like a well-strategized, brilliantly executed denial of service attack could bring down any number of infrastructures around the world. So on the plus side, the largest one surely for any company that's looking to make a profit or to avoid laying off workers is that you're moving to a variable cost model, that you have fluid architecture and agility, not just in agile development, but agility overall. That you have, from a DR perspective, from a disaster recovery perspective, you've reduced the complexity and the size of the plans for any kind of business process, not just for an IT function. That you can dynamically reconfigure workloads. That's what Niall was talking about in one of the next steps we need to look at about work groups and workloads. And furthermore, that you can distribute data to reduce points of failure, dispersing it more broadly. So I guess the conclusion on the pluses and the minuses is this is not something we should try and shut down, ignore, avoid, stick our heads in the sand. That really risk professionals need to come up to speed very, very quickly and ensure that their IT architects are up to speed in dealing with the vendors, and that their risk people are sitting tight on the controls, even as some of them are still being developed. Now, the third piece I'd like to talk about is what I hope will emerge, and it's somewhat different than CISOs would give you, and that is the notion of a trust cloud. There have been some white papers on this. That actually public and private clouds can help government create new information services that can self-organize. And we've seen, so the very act of self-organization takes place. We've seen some of this around California wildfires, for example, where 911 was not, in fact, used because it just didn't work as well as a Second Life mashup that was deployed, even among emergency management professionals. We're not talking about young IT outliers. We're talking about emergency management professionals. In the 2008 LA earthquake, when cellular communications failed pretty completely, both the Red Cross and emergency management moved over to Twitter. And in hurricanes, I think we've seen recently, and then further back in the past, how blogs, wikis, Facebook, and the emergence of groups like Crisis Commons have started to fill a void. And I would suggest that part of that is that if young professionals who truly understand the internet and their potential can't can't practice that in their work, they're going to practice it outside their work on behalf of a greater good. I know that's not what people usually think, but you have only to get onto Facebook and to sign up with Crisis Camp or Crisis Comments and see what in fact is going on. Niall talked about being able to deploy rapidly for Haiti. We've seen over and over how various organizations can be mobilized using the cloud. And then I just saw an article this morning in Emergency Management magazine about smartphones now being seen as the next generation of emergency administration. So this is something that isn't simply a question in your data centers. It's a fact of the world that we live in, and far, far better to understand it, and as these guys have said, get in on the ground floor to help shape it, than to wait and be